Hello, my fellow CS colleagues, and welcome to another installment of CS Stories. I'm your CSS nerd, Sarah B. Cruz, coming at you live. I am so excited that you guys have joined me again this evening on the Knowledge and Nonsense Network, where we've got all the room in the world for knowledge and maybe just a little bit of room for nonsense. No, okay. Speaking of nonsense, let's start the show off with a nice break the ice. Let's talk about a little bit of a professional flop I had recently. I know. You're like, Sarah, how do you have one for every single show? Listen, we got to pave the way of our professional foundations with these little steps. And remember, not every milestone is one that we celebrate. Oftentimes, milestones are things that we learn from or pivotal points in our professional development that indicate growth or where we need to grow more. So this particular flop has to do with a video broadcasting format that I won't name because I don't have the rights to their name, but I was supposed to attend an important meeting and I went to go get on said meeting and it had to do an update 5 minutes before the meeting. Fortunately, the program updated itself and I got to the meeting on time. But with that being said, if I had planned a little bit better and anticipated these types of spaces for last minute updates or sneaking in little bits of information here and there, if we don't push ourselves right to the wire and give ourselves that buffer room, we can be better prepared to present ourselves in a way that really personifies how we want to show up professionally in our own ambitions. All right. So again, I won't say the company's name, but I feel like they're always updating. I digress. I am so excited, and I want to thank you all again for joining me. I cannot wait for you all to meet our special guest today. Today we have Christina Fast. Christina Fast from SPECT is joining us today. Christina has worked as a sterile processing technician and educator since 2006. In 2013, she founded the charitable organization Sterile Processing Education Charitable Trust, SPECT, and has led the organization in providing comprehensive training programs for healthcare workers and resource-constrained companies. Yes, talk about showing up for your industry in places where you're needed the most. Christina has gained international respect through publications in BMJ Global Health, the AMIC Journal, and the Surgical Infections. In 2018, Isham awarded her Educator of the Year, and in 2017, she was recognized as one of Calgary's top 40 under 40 to make a difference. If we had a sound bit for a round of applause, this would be it. I'm not going to keep all her amazingness away from you guys any longer. Please help me in joining Christina Fast from SPECT.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I can't begin to tell you how honored I feel to have you joining us on CS Stories. I promised the viewers that the guests that we had on in this month would be some of the most insightful and would tickle all sorts of the pride and proud feelings of being a sterile processing technician, and you meet that mark. So thank you.
Oh, good. I was going to say, I hope I meet that mark.
Yes.
I feel honored to be included. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited. And I know that we used a lot of different ways to personify what Christina does for our industry. But in order to show up in that way, we all know that we had to start somewhere. And that means we had different tribulations along the way. So Christina, without further ado, please tell us what your professional flop was.
I really had a hard time when I started thinking about it because there have been so many, and I'm sure you have a lot of guests who say the same thing. I mean, you don't get anywhere without having professional flops on a weekly basis at times throughout your career anyways. But the one that really came to mind for me was kind of the one that will eventually lead us to discussing SPECT. But as you know, but as the listeners may not know, I began as a MDRT, or what as we call them in Canada, sterile processing technician, or CST. And then I began teaching new immigrants to Canada the Sterile Processing and Certification program. And through that, I gained an interest in volunteering abroad. So I think you know this about me as well. I applied to volunteer with a nonprofit organization called Mercy Ships. And for everyone listening, they're the world's largest nonprofit hospital ship. And they're a constant need for OR sterilizers, is what they call those working in our profession. So people who are qualified to do our work, ideally certified, but it's not mandatory to volunteer with the organization. And I applied to do so. And so for the first time in my life, I went to the continent of Africa in 2011, and I volunteered with Mercy Ships in the port of Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. And I spent 3 months there as a volunteer.
Wow.
So yes, 3 months volunteering and about $10,000 raised to get there, because not only do you volunteer time, you also have to pay your costs and so on. Yes, quite an experience. And I should mention I was 23 at the time that I did this. That's so you can do the math there, but yeah, so I just, threw caution to the wind, went to Mercy Ships and began working in their sterilization department, which they have 7 operating theaters, so it's a bit of a tiny department. And very quickly, I realized that those I was working with, there were 4 others in the department, they hadn't had any previous experience working in sterilization or working in CSSD. So I was the only eligible individual there. But that said, I was new. So they had been working there. And I think anyone listening, maybe you can put yourselves in my shoes for a moment of having worked in the profession for a number of years in a number of settings and countries already, having being a subject matter expert, let's say, in that area, and then going to a department and working with others who have never had any theoretical knowledge or training in the industry, and being in a position where they are actually assigned to train you and teach you. So that was the position I was in, and of course, as a nonprofit organization, and I in no way want to throw Mercy Ships under a bus, because they are such an incredible organization. But as with many nonprofit organizations, they don't necessarily have the same standards in place that a regulated healthcare facility would. And they do an incredible job, and they try to meet all standards set on an international level. But when you're relying on donations, you don't necessarily have everything at hand. Anyways, this is becoming a longer version of this flop, but I feel that it's important to give you this context.
I feel like I'm in that moment, so it was perfect build-up. Take me to the next step.
Wonderful.
This is wonderful.
Yes. So here we are in this position, not wanting to step on toes, but also trying to teach my teachers, essentially. Yes, which we know how well that goes. And I'm quite a genuine person and an open book. And so I don't really know how to be manipulative in terms of teaching someone to make them, you understand what I'm saying. So I was really, really grateful when I was asked by one of the leadership staff on the ship to actually hold evening sessions. Because at that time in 2011, I was a certified ISHM instructor and I was teaching in Calgary. So not only was I a technician, I was also a teacher. But again, in the situation I was. I was grateful to begin holding volunteer classes with those I was working with. And also I was asked by leadership staff within the organization to give input on equipment, on consumable supplies, on helping develop standards. And of course, I said yes immediately, not knowing what a large task that is. And that's not even the flop I'm focusing on today. I mean, that is a flop that right there in itself. But here, I'm leading into something a bit bigger. So I began holding evening sessions, and of the 3 months that I was a volunteer, I spent, so what, that's 12 weeks or 8, 9, yes, of the 12 weeks, I spent 11 of those weeks completely focused on how I can help this department, what I can do. And that was my vision. That wasn't my vision before I went to Mercy Ships, before I had that experience. My vision was different. That was my vision there. So it seemed like it was very clear that this is something I can do to contribute to raising the standards, to decreasing the risk of infection, to passing on knowledge. And actually all 4 of those individuals that I ended up holding evening classes with, they became certified, actually the first ever Sierra Leoneans to become certified with ISHM, which was a bit of a challenge at that time because we had to do a prometric testing. I had to rent out a library on Mercy Ships, so we're floating off the coast of West Africa, and in the middle of the night when no one is using our one server for 300 plus people, we at 3 a.m. plan for the tests so that the internet doesn't fail when they're writing. Right. So that's a side story. Yes, this is just quite an elaborate story.
No, this is great.
So so back to what I was saying, I felt that was my calling, that was my purpose, and the reason I was there, and I was so focused on it. And it was in my last week, so week 12 of my volunteer experience in Sierra Leone, that I was invited to visit a local hospital. And to that point, I had never gone to see a local facility in Sierra Leone, but I had 2 nurses from that hospital actually coming on board the ship in evenings, attending my classes. Oh, okay. And when I would call on them to answer questions like what kind of sterilization equipment you have, or something more specific than that, they often deferred to the book in front of them and the answers that were written there, which seemed a bit suspicious to me. And I thought, okay, maybe in order to best get a sense of what they're doing and how I can help them, thankfully I received an invite. Otherwise I was planning to invite myself to their facility.
Yes.
And that brings me to the moment where my vision changed. And and I acknowledged that was a flopping moment, if I can call it that. Visions evolve. This is true. The vision did evolve, and visions do evolve constantly, don't they?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So, and I know you were like, and then this along the way, and then this along the way, but
so many parts to the story.
If you needed a better personification of how when we're on an objective driven goal and it can try to bring us so many different places, let alone different flops on those journeys just to get to one, you literally described everybody's career in one go. So Christina, that was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're going to sit with that. And when we come back, I'll talk with Christina a little bit about the transition and evolution of her vision and how she professionally pivoted from that flop. All right, everybody, welcome back, and thanks for checking in from the words from our sponsors for today's show. So Christina, in case you couldn't tell, with all of the pop-ups from our people attending below, they got what you were serving: objective-driven goals, evolving visions, evolving your why along the path to what you thought was where you were going, only to end up at a point with so, so I just think that was such a phenomenal roadmap you took us on, and really, I am so grateful for it. There were a couple of things that you had mentioned in it, and initially, when you had mentioned the idea of theoretical training, it got me thinking, because I think sometimes sterile processing lives in this space of hypothesis, philosophy, uh, theoretically delivering an idea without actionable steps. So it's interesting that you were bringing in this theoretical training and application to a space of people already doing hand-on skills to make their applicable skills more well-rounded. Can you speak a little bit about how you added theory to action to make your vision, even though it led to a flop?
Theory to action to make my vision. Well, if we're talking about the department side with Mercy Ships, I mean that has progressed significantly since that time, and I do feel actually, even though, as I mentioned in that last week, I kind of felt like I had missed the mark in what I thought was my vision, is actually maybe a great vision, but the one that the path that I wasn't meant to be on. So, but thankfully, with that time I did invest, it has made a significant impact for the organization itself. There's been a lot of changes to the department, and when you're one person with the theoretical knowledge and the practical knowledge, it's easy to then use that to create change, to ensure to implement standards. And when we began, before the theoretical knowledge was there for my colleagues, they did not understand what I was trying to do, or when I would say, okay, these are the steps, the reasons we do this, that was missing. So it's do the same thing day in, day out, because that's what we know, that's what we've done. And after the training, there were so many lights going on, and like, oh yes, that's why you were mentioning that, and that's why we would do that. And then we were able to work as a team, as you are. When you have the same knowledge, you can work as a team. When one person has it, it's really difficult to expect people to be able to think outside of what we're trained on in a practical way, if that makes sense.
No, I think that does. And I almost think it's beautiful how you use the practical explanation to explain theoretical, because you almost think they're oxymorons when you put the two words next to each other, almost like they're antonyms. But they have to work conjunctly. To have one without the other, to have full application of professional attributes, you must incorporate theoretical and practical. And I think that's so wonderful.
Exactly. And I mean, and this is just jumping ahead, but in a lot of my work in healthcare facilities as an educator, without the practical knowledge, I see it's easy for healthcare workers to unknowingly take shortcuts, because without that theoretical understanding of microbiology and infection prevention, these are subjects that we study, but when we become certified, even anatomy, physiology, all of these areas that we think, oh, well, we don't use that on a day-to-day basis, but we do. We are using that knowledge when we assemble instrument sets, when we know what instrument is missing or how it's used. So that theory is crucial to being able to do a job to a high standard.
Yeah, and I couldn't relate more to that, because I just finished teaching anatomy and physiology in my sterile processing course at the local community college. And some of the people in my class haven't been in school since high school, or some of them just came out of school and they're like, oh my God, I thought I just escaped all of this again. And I think as sterile processing professionals, say it loud, professionals, as sterile processing professionals, we not necessarily take for granted, but we don't realize how much baseline knowledge is built into our expertise level, in our foundation, that we view as just common sense now. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think that that's beautiful that you can move into a space and offer that theoretical knowledge to create that well-rounded picture, to understand
Mm.
why the actions we have implications, and have an outcome.
Yeah.
Very much how our professional flops clearly made this amazing pivot. And I have to ask, where did you said you were jumping ahead of the time? Tell me how this transition to spec trust, because I have to know more.
Yeah. So, I mean, that last week and that first visit to the facility, the healthcare facility in Sierra Leone,
Mm,
I felt a bit speechless,
mm,
and to be honest, a bit silly. I felt like I had missed the mark, and perhaps the intention that I was there, or
mm,
almost missed it. I should say I didn't miss it, thankfully, but I was so focused on this department and this organization that I felt this is where I need to invest all of my energy and assistance. And it wasn't until the very end that I realized something had been under my nose the whole time. And it was only by chance that I was given an opportunity to go to this local facility. And when I was there, I found that there was no sterile processing at all. So here I was thinking, oh my gosh, what is this I'm working with? I need to, this is my focus now. I was emailing and calling and trying to get anyone I knew in the profession involved to help. And what I thought was should have been my main focus and passion, while it was very important that all of that happened, here was such a greater need.
mm,
And that's where I felt that I had flopped, and if you can call it that. I mean, a learning curve. Yeah,
mm.
a very important moment, career shaping moment. Yes. And seeing that there was no sterile processing, there was some broken sterilizers that had been donated, there was no instrument, detergent, brushes,
Mm,
surgical instruments. There were two operations going on when I went to this facility. One was a neural procedure and the other one was a cesarean section. They were both happening in the same room on each side of me. And in the middle
mm,
of that room is where the instruments were being processed. And by
mm,
processed at this facility, the surgical instruments were soaked in chlorine and water for 1 hour between
mm,
patient use for
mm.
invasive surgery. So yes, shocking, speechless.
Wow.
There were so many emotions and things I felt. And the nurses I had been training for the last few weeks were working in this department, were OR
Mm,
nurses. Um, and I realized I had missed the mark there, that I had failed them as an educator.
oh.
I felt like even though they were understanding and learning the theory, they actually didn't have any of the tools or resources necessary to apply the theory in their practical setting.
Yeah, and talk about setting a standard or even building a workflow and not providing, that's not like having all the pieces and not having instructions. It's like getting the instructions and you don't have any of the stuff that you put together that you ordered. So
Yeah.
I can only imagine the frustration. But I think it's great that you were able to, I don't even want to say see a more profound calling in that space there. So it's
Mm.
almost like you didn't even give yourself a chance to settle in your flop. You didn't have that reflective moment. You were just like, oh my gosh, I'm called into action. And what was the process like? I know you said you sent out a bunch of emails, but I can't imagine what a startup looks like for such a
Mm.
nonprofit organization like this. So,
Yeah.
how did you keep momentum or motivation when you were personifying your why in action? How did you keep moving?
Well, the emails and calls came before that moment. That was
Mm,
when I was really fixated on being able to support the department on the ship. And Mercy ships, I should mention, in comparison and um, in regard to in comparison to many high income country healthcare facilities, is is a high income country healthcare facility. So
right.
it's in West Africa, but it's completely isolated, and they do have state-of-the-art equipment. So what happened in that moment after I saw that facility, it was so clear. I called my parents almost immediately after, who are part of the major reason that this organization is here today. Yeah, they've been incredibly supportive and engaged with the work. I called, I said, this is what I just saw. This is I didn't mention this, but I talked to a post-operative doctor at this facility, and he had said he'd seen almost 90% of the patients come back with infection, post-operative infection, 90%.
90.
Yeah.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Talking to the nurses in the facility, they had never had any training on infection prevention or microbiology or practical or theoretical training on sterile processing. So all of this information, I absorbed it. I processed it to my parents and to some close friends that were there with me in Sierra Leone, who I'd met with through Mercy Ships.
Okay.
One of them had suggested, you know what, sorry, backtracking just a few moments before that, I was verbalizing what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and then I started saying, there are so many things they could do. There are so many things I could help them with. Simple things, putting up drapes, simple things, like using the tools they have. But they didn't have that knowledge to be able to do that. And so as I was verbalizing what could be done, what I could help do, a friend of mine said, why don't you start a nonprofit organization so that you can continue doing this? And if this is what's happening in one of the largest facilities in a country of 11 million people, this is probably happening in other countries as well. And so at that time she had said, start an NGO. And I said, what's an NGO? This was a long time ago, and I have no shame in saying I didn't know at that time what NGO stood for. So after a Google search, reading things, Wikipedia, I told my parents what I wanted to do, and they immediately said, yes, that's like, there is a need there. You've found the need. And of course, I mean, it's been a journey since that moment.
Wow. So, I mean, let's break down as we round out our half hour. I can't believe it's gone by so quickly.
I know.
I can't believe it. So just, I felt like I had two really, really good little golden nuggets in there. I like how you mentioned that you had a support group. You had someone that genuinely believed in you, so they believed in your mission. And I can't help but feel like your why is really resonating with all these different aspects. You just present yourself so professionally and mission driven, and your passion shines in that place. Your core values are personified, and your purpose sits in there. So it's exciting for me to see when you have all those different aspects of why coming through in one moment, pushing past the flop. That aha moment it's really more than just an aha moment. It's like a, oh yeah moment. And
Totally.
I was hoping maybe you could take us out with some motivational words on making sure you have a support group. How do we make sure we have a team, that we're not doing this solo style? No solopreneurs, right?
Honestly, if you truly do have passion and you care about this profession, they come to you. Like, you just talk to people. I have never gone searching for mentors. They have found me. And I'm so grateful for that they've seen something in me, because that is ultimately, what we're looking for in terms of affirmation and building your confidence and trust with someone. But I found some of my people. And you're just drawn to them, and they may not work in the profession at all, right? You're just talking to your people, and very quickly who's going to be there and who's going to encourage you and help you get to where you want to go with your goals, your vision, ambitions. And certainly my parents have been huge in that area for me. But there's been a lot of other mentors and role models, and I have not gone searching for them, but I have held on to them tightly. When I found them,
Right.
yeah, I have
Yes.
not let go of them. I've held on to them tightly. I've let them know how much I care and appreciate for everything they do, because it has to be returned. It has to go both ways when you find someone who helps support you. And it's not possible without that support, as we know.
Yes, I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. And it's like, find your people, but make yourself available to be found,
Yes. Have
right?
conversations with, yeah, and it's
Yes.
hard. I can't put myself out there the same way as I used to. But for years and years and years, it was constant. It was constant. So put yourself out there as you do, Sarah. I'm always completely like, yeah, amazed at how much you put yourself out there. And it's daunting. Like it's very brave. It's a very brave thing to do, but that's what gets you places. So really, you have to
Right, but
you
then
have
I
to be
get to
okay to
find
fall off
people
the
like
horse.
Christina. Like, look,
Yeah,
I found
exactly.
people, my
Yeah.
people, my nerds. We hang out and we're
Yeah,
better in groups, right?
exactly, exactly.
Oh, I'm so sad a half hour went by already. I'm so
I know, we
bummed.
could stay here for a few hours, I'm sure. I'm like, there's so
Yes.
much more I would love to say, but
Mhm.
I'm sure you have return guests. At some point, you're gonna have to
Yes.
invite
Yes.
us back for a follow-up. Where are they now?
Yes. Yes, and I'm always for a CSS nerd out. We don't need a
Yeah,
StreamYard. All we need is a good cup of coffee and a really great topic. And I have a feeling that not just
yeah,
you, but everybody out there has information that they could share. So, if
yeah.
you're interested in being a guest on our CS stories, don't be shy. You don't have to be of a certain caliber to have a flop that can have an impact on those around you. Who knows? Maybe when you share your flop, it'll help other people get over the humps that they're feeling from their own. So just to give you guys a little bit of teaser of next week, next show, we actually have the Stir the Pot himself, Jesse Lopez. If you are not familiar with Jesse Lopez, get familiar, because he definitely puts himself out there and he is ready to stir the pot with all the ingredients that make up sterile processing. Christina, thank you again for joining us and letting us speak to you about your professional development journey.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Sarah.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everyone.